Masechet Hagigah Daf Vav. We have three topics today. First, we're going to have three questions to Beth Hillel and Beth Shamai regarding the age of children to bring. Then we're going to bring proofs for each side about how much money for olot versus shelamim. And then we're going to spend the rest of the daf asking, were there olot reiah brought at Har Sinai? So we're going back to the Mishnah. The last two clauses of the Mishnah, the second to last was, how old is a katan? The last one is about money. Regarding katan, we saw two opinions. Beth Shammai says if a child is so young that he cannot even ride on the shoulders of his father, then he does not have to. But if he's old enough, then he would have to. Well, that's about, 1 year old. 1 year old, as long, a newborn is too floppy, can't hold his head up. But between 1 and 2, the father would have to carry the boy on his shoulders. Beth Hillel says no, a little bit older, as long as he can walk, even if not so steady, and the father has to hold his hand. So that's probably like 2 years old, would have to bring his son to up to Jerusalem, to the Bet HaMikdash, and bring a korban. All right, that was the machloket Bet Shamai and Bet Hillel. And now we're going to ask a question that actually applies to both of them. Ezeu katan, kol shenei kol lirkob al ketefo shel aviv. That was Bet Shamai's bechule and so on. Matkif la Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera has a question. Ad hacha man ait atyeh. Who brought him all the way to Jerusalem? The question is assuming that the mother didn't come, because the mother is not chayevet. So the father brought the child. Let's say they live in Modi'in. Okay, so the father brought the child from Modi'in to Yerushalayim. Well, how'd he get there? Obviously, he can walk. I mean, you don't expect he can. The father carried him the whole way. And after all, any child who is under 2 years old, generally, children back then would be nursed until around 2 years old. So they wouldn't be able to go anywhere without their mother before 2 years old. So therefore, there's no need to say that a child who cannot be carried or cannot walk with the help of his father is patur, because they can't even make it to Jerusalem. Never mind going from the city wall up to the Bet HaMikdash. That's the question. Amar le Abaye ad hacha timichayeva imeh besimcha aitite imeh. Mikan va'elach im yachol lalot v'lechos biyado shel aviv mirushalayim halabayit chayav. Abaye says your assumption was incorrect that the mother doesn't come. Actually, generally the mother would come. The whole family would come, because it says v'samachta, right? Ata ubetecha, you and your family have to rejoice. So although women are exempt from bringing a korban olot reiah, they don't have to bring the korban, but part of the joy of the holiday is to all be together and all show up in Jerusalem. So therefore, the mother would come even with her infants, and so she would be bringing them while nursing, and so that's not the problem. So the mother brought them from wherever they lived to Jerusalem. From then forward, that is the question. So if the child can walk, even if it's not steady, according to Beth Hillel, around 2 years old, would have to come. If the child cannot walk at all, even with the help of his father, then according to Beth Hillel does not have to. According to Beth Shammai would have to if he can carry on his shoulders. Okay, fantastic. And now we learned this really important halacha that women actually would be chayavot to come to Jerusalem to celebrate, even though they don't have to bring a korban. Heshiv Rabbi Tachat Bet Hillel. Okay, now Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is going to ask a question on behalf of Bet Hillel. That actually are from the same family of the Nasi, so it makes sense he wants to defend Bet Hillel's honor. L'divrei Bet Shammai v'chana lo alata ki amara li'isha adi gamela nad v'havi otiv. Hannah did not come to the Mishkan in Shiloh because she told her husband, no, I want to wait until the child is weaned. So that means that's about 2 years old. That means when the child was, let's say, 18 months old, 18-month-old can ride on his father's shoulders, and yet she did not bring him. The child did not come. So, and so this is a challenge to Bet Shammai. According to Bet Hillel, it makes sense, because Bet Hillel would say around 2 years old is when a child can start walking. So, and that's when the child is also weaned. So therefore, we can assume that when the child was weaned, and that's the same time he can walk. So according to Bet Hillel, Shemuel did come when he was 2 years old. According to Beth Shamai, that it's after 1 year old can be carried. How come Hannah did not bring him? That's the question. Amar le Avu, Rav Yehuda Nasi's father answered him. Okay, well, he's also from the same line, but so nevertheless, he is he's defending Beth Shammai. He says, I have, according to your reasoning, what about Hannah? She also has to come to Jerusalem, although she doesn't have to bring a korban. Nevertheless, she would have to come as part of the holiday to come and celebrate together with the family. Ella Hannah mefkanuta מפנקותה יתרתה חזיה לבבי שמואל וחשה בבי שמואל לחולשה דאורחה. Rather, Hannah did not come because she was pampering Shemuel. She was very concerned about him. She was overprotective of Shemuel, that he might become sick on the way, and she didn't want to take any risks. We could understand her. After all, she waited many, many years to have a child, and also maybe, who knows, maybe the baby Shemuel had some weakness or didn't feel well, and therefore she stayed home. The baby she didn't want to take the baby, so she had to stay home as well to nurse baby Shemuel, and that's why she didn't go. But otherwise, she would have to, and so therefore that defends Beth Shammai. Because if the child was healthy, then the mother would come, and then the father would take the infant child, as long as he can go on the shoulders to the Mishkan or to Har Bayit, and so therefore there was no challenge to Beth Shammai. Okay, third question, which is a question to both. Ba'er Rabbi Shimon, katan chiger l'divrei Bet Shammai, v'soma l'divrei shenehem mahu. An adult who has a bad leg does not have to come and bring olot to the reiah. But what about a child? According to Bet Shammai, the child doesn't have to walk because the father can carry him. So it doesn't matter if the baby has a bad leg, so it can get there anyway. So according to Bet Shammai, if there's a baby who has a bad leg, but the father's carrying him, is that exempt because he has a bad leg, or obligatory because he can get there on his father's shoulders? And how about a blind person? An adult who's blind does not have to bring a korban because he's blind. He's not going to be able to get there, and we don't have to require him to get help. But a child who is blind, since according to Beth Hillel, the father has to hold his hand anyway. And according to Beth Shammai, old enough to go on his shoulders. So either way, the child will be able to make it there, even if the child is blind. So do we say it's about the intrinsic quality of being either lame or blind, and that intrinsic quality makes a person exempt? Or is it just a practical matter? Someone who's blind or lame will have difficulty getting there, but a child will not have a difficulty getting there with his father's help. And so the child would be obligated. That's the question. Now we narrow the question. It says, what kind of case you're talking about? If you're talking about an irreversible disease, that a lame person who's not going to get better, and a blind person who's not going to see, then if an adult who has these problems is exempt, then for sure a child's obligation is certainly much less than an adult. According to the Talmud Bavli, it's only d'Rabbanan because of chinuch. And so this child, since it's a permanent blindness or permanently lame, is never going to grow up and have to bring the korban. So there's no need to educate them when they are a child. So for sure in that case, no, they're exempt. But what if it's a child who is only temporarily lame, broke his leg, but he's going to get better? Or he had some kind of eye, something or other, and he's going to be fine later on. So then, on the one hand, we still have to educate the child because he's going to grow up and he's going to be healthy, and he will have to go. And as a child, the father is helping him anyway. So you could say that he's obligated. Or the other side, which is what we're going to conclude, is that right now they have the same disease that an adult would have. And just like an adult is exempt, so the child right now is exempt, even if next year they'll be better. Amar Abaye, and here's the answer. Kol echad degadol mechayim midoraita, katana name mechanechin le midrabanan. Kol echad degadol patur midoraita, midrabanan, katan name patur. That's the general rule. Any person or case or issue that if it was an adult he would have to bring the korban olah upon coming to Jerusalem. Midoraita, so then a child would also have to be was obligated midrabanan because of education. In any case, and that's our case, that if it was an adult, he would be exempt midoraita, and any adult who's lame or blind would be exempt. So that child in such a situation is also exempt, even midrabanan, even though it may only be temporary, and even though the father can help him out, it doesn't matter. That's the final answer. A person is exempt. Okay, and now we get to the last clause of the Mishnah, which is that how much money was the minimum to spend on these sacrifices. So Bet Shamai says the reiah, which is an korban olah, you have to spend at least 2 coins, and korban Hagigah, that's a shelamim, which is mostly in by the owner. That you only have to bring 1 coin. And Bet Hillel reverses it, and he says the korban reiah, which is an olah, that you have to bring just 1, and the Hagigah, which is shelamim, that one you have to bring 2. So let's see the reasoning behind each, and what each would say about the reasoning of the other. Tenor Banan. Bet Shamai omrim hareaya shete chesef, Hagigah ma'as chesef. Shehareaya olah kula lagavoa, ma she'en ken b'Hagigah. Bet Shamai says we have to honor God. And the reiah is in korban olah. It's all going up to heaven, and therefore we should spend more on the korban olah. Whereas Hagigah, we are eating ourselves, so therefore it's lower. If you're hungry and you want to have more and you want to eat more, that's all up to you. But in terms of a basic minimum, you got to spend more on God than on yourself. That's Bet Shamai. And another thing, masinu ba'aseret shediba behena katuv be'olot yoter mi shelamim, on the regarding the korbanot that one brings for on Shavuot with the shtei halechem. If you look at the list, you see that you have 1 bull, 2 rams, 7 sheep as burnt offerings, a lot of olot, but only 2 sheep as peace offerings, as shelamim. And so that's another example of where, when it comes to olot, we bring a lot. Shelamim is a few. We have to honor God more than we honor ourselves. That's Bet Shamai. Bet Hillel omrim hareaya ma'ah chesef b'Hagigah shetei chesef. He says the opposite. Shechagigah yeshna lifnei hadibur ma she'en ken bereiyah. So the korban Hagigah, the shelamim, it was brought even before Matan Torah. Okay, this is going to be a key pasuk that's we're going to see again and again all the way till the end of the daf. And this is at the end of Parashat Mishpatim. Now, this is actually said after Matan Torah, but this is subject to the rule of En Mukdam U'Muchar, and the rabbis say that this event happened actually before Matan Torah, and this is when the Na'arim, right, those young Kohanim went, and Moshe told them, go and make sacrifices. Vayishlach et na'arei b'nei Israel, vayalu olot, vayizbechu zebachim shelamim ladonai parim. And so they made two types of offerings, olot and zevachim, that were shelamim. Okay, we're going to get to the olot in a minute, but right now we're focusing just on the shelamim. Those olot, we're going to say, might have just been olot for korban tamid. So leave them out, and they're not olat reiah according to this opinion. And it says anyway here that zevachim shelamim. These shelamim, what were they? They were korban Hagigah. And there you go. Korban Hagigah was given even before Matan Torah, whereas olat reiah was not given before Matan Torah. This is how Bet Hillel is reading that pasuk. As you can see, that's not the only way you could read the pasuk. So that's proof number 1. And furthermore, when all the Nesi'im gave gifts at the inauguration of the Mishkan, you can see each Nasi, they brought 1 cow, 1 ram, and a sheep as burnt offerings. So that's the olot, but so very few olot, but they brought 2, 5, and 5 as shelamim. So they brought many more shelamim than olot. And there you go. Shelamim, you see, is more important, or you should bring more for shelamim than for olot. Maybe his reasoning is better to eat it, and at least is going somewhere. Olot is going to Hashem, but no one's benefiting from it. Okay, so that's the basic reasons. Now, Bet Hillel, what do you say about Bet Shamai's reasons? right? He had good proofs. The first point of Bet Shamai that olot reiah is better because it goes up to heaven and we should honor heaven more than ourselves. No, I would tell you the opposite. Bet Hillel says Hagigah is better because there's two parties that are eating it. Hashem has part of it. Part of it goes on to the Mizbeach, and the Kohanim also eat part of it, and the rest of it is eaten by the owners. So actually, since it has two different parties eating it, it's even better. In a way, it's like it symbolizes the berit, right? You come together and we're eating together. We are partaking of Hashem's food, and better that it not, says someone actually gets some sustenance out of it and not just get burnt totally. And so therefore, Hagigah, you have to spend more on. There's twice the people eating, right? When you go to that fancy restaurant, you get the steak for two, right? You spend extra on it because two people eating it. And you brought a proof from Shavuot, where you have more olot and shelamim. Yeah, but Shavuot, that's a communal sacrifice, and that's not similar to this one. This one is a korban yachid. Every person that comes on pilgrimage is bringing these korbanot, and so we should compare an individual korban with another individual korban. That's the nisiim; those were individual korbanot, and we should not compare the individual one from a communal one, which is Shavuot. So that's why I'd rather compare it to the nisiim rather than Shavuot. Okay, Bet Hillel shows that his arguments are better. All right, we'll turn to Bet Shamai. Let him get a chance for a rebuttal. Bet Shamai, my tamala amri ke Bet Hillel. Dekamar Hagigah adifa de'eshna lifnei hadibur. Reiah me yeshna lifnei hadibur. The point number one that you made, that there was a korban shelamim, which is with Hagigah. That's better because that was done before Matan Torah. Actually, that pasuk says vayalu olot. Olot refers to olot reiah, and that was also done before the dibur. You conveniently left out those words. And the I'd rather compare the korbanot of the pilgrim to Shavuot, because Shavuot is true for all generations, all future generations, as long as there's a Mishkan or Bet HaMikdash, you're going to bring them. And so a pilgrimage also, as long as Bet HaMikdash, people are going to bring them. It applies long term. And I'm not going to bring it from the Nisi'im. That was a one-time event. The one time, the inauguration of the Mishkan, the Nisi'im gave gifts, and that's it. That's never again. So I'm not going to compare something that was only a one-time event to something that happens in all generations. Good. And now we understand the reasoning for Bet Hillel and Bet Shamai, their proofs, and why they prefer their proofs over the other proofs. Now, Bet Hillel, מה ישנה חגיגה דישנה לפני הדיבור, דכתיב ויזבחו זבחים שלמים, ראיה נמה דכתיב והיה עלו עולות. Okay, now back to that pasuk, which was really the crux of the matter, since it does say at the end of the pasuk, ויזבחו זבחים שלמים. Fine, everyone agrees that the shelamim here refers to korban chagiga. Why are they bringing korban chagiga anyway? Well, this is Matan Torah. So number one, the Midrash associates Matan Torah with Shavuot, so it was actually a holiday. Now, even though they didn't have a Mishkan yet, they didn't build it yet, but Ma'amad Har Sinai is a theophany, right? If the whole point is to come, you're going to come and see the face of God regarding Matan Torah in Devarim Perikeh. It says panim befanim. So certainly this would qualify as seeing the face of God. And so even though there's no Ohel Moed yet, and there was no holidays that were established yet, nevertheless, this does fit all the criteria of what will become Shavuot and the holidays, and experiencing a revelation, seeing the holiness of God. Okay, so therefore, everyone agrees that this pasuk, shelamim refers to shelamim of Hagigah. However, the first half of the pasuk, bayalu olot, right? That means it's a good point. It says bayalu olot, so that's olat reiah. How come Bet Hillel is ignoring those words? And here's the answer. Kasibre Bet Hillel, olah shekribu Yisrael bamidbar, olat tamid havai. That olah was not olat reiah. It was olah for the regular tamid offering that every morning, every afternoon, you have to bring a korban tamid. That's what the olot were over there. Okay. ובית שמאי סברה, עולה שהקריבו בני ישראל במדבר, עולת ראייה הווי. And Bet Shammai says, no, the olah in this pasuk is referring to olat reiah. So that's the crux of the machloket. What is the olah in this pasuk? Amad Abaye, Bet Shammai. Okay, that concludes this section of which one you need more, Betil Bet Shammai. And now we get to the final question: were there olot reiah at Har Sinai? We're going to see three opinions that say yes, and three opinions that say no. We already know that Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, what they hold, and now we're going to see others that line up on one side or the other of this machloket. So Bet Shammai, and it says here to be El Azar in the printed edition. However, if we look in the Rabbi Elazar would be Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat probably. However, if you look in the manuscript, you'll see that only in the printed editions does it say Elazar. In every manuscript, it says it be Eliezer, except for one, Munich 95, but the other ones have all have Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer means Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenos. And that is not a coincidence, right? Rabbi Eliezer is a Shamuti. He is a follower of Bet Shammai. So it makes sense that Rabbi Eliezer would line up with Bet Shammai. Also, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Ishmael, the contemporary of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Ishmael is also known to follow a more peshat understanding of the Pesukim, as opposed to Rabbi Akiva, who's more creative in his derasha. So he's also, in some way, part of the old school, not as much as Rabbi Eliezer and Bet Shammai, but somewhat. So it makes sense actually to put them together. We're going to see by the end of the daf, we're going to actually take out Rabbi Ishmael. But it's interesting that the Gemara is trying to put him in. It's characterizing these as those who follow some of the old traditions associated with Beth Shammai. Okay, they all think that that pasuk, when it says Vayalu olot, is referring to olat reiah. And yes, in fact, they brought olat reiah even before Matan Torah, and that shows that it's really important, and that's why he says you have to bring double the amount, and they all agree with Bet Shammai. Bet Hillel, Ve'Rabbi Akiva, Ve'Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, Kulehu Sevira Lehu, Olah Sheikribu Yisrael Bamidbar, Olat Tamid Havai. And these other three follow Bet Hillel, and they say, no, that Vayalu olot, that said in Parashat Mishpatim, is referring to Korban Tamid. And in fact, they did not bring Olat Reiah at that time. Okay, and so now we're going to go through each one and bring a source. Bet Shammai Hadamaran. Bet Shammai, we already gave you the source. Rabbi Ishmael de Tanya. Rabbi Ishmael Omer, Kilalot Ne'emru B'Sinai, Upratot Bohal Moed. ורבי עקיבא אומר, קללות ופרטות נאמרו בסיני, ונשנו בהול מועד, ונשתלשלו בערבות מואב. Okay, this braita is essential and has far-reaching consequences about how to read laws in the Torah in general. So remember this source. Rabbi Ishmael, he's the one that said Dibra Torah Kilshon Ben Adam, right? And when it says a double language like aser to aser, says that's just a way of normal language. Don't worry about it. Torah uses normal human syntax. And this goes along with the same idea that many laws are repeated. You find the same law said in Sefer Shemot, and then again in Vayikra, again in Devarim. All right, and each time is a little different. It adds something, it has something else that doesn't say. What do we do with these doublings of laws? Rabbi Ishmael says all the generalities were said at Har Sinai, only the generalities, and then in Ohel Moed during the 40 years of the desert. Then Hashem continued to speak to Moshe in an ongoing revelation and gave him more and more details that Moshe then taught Bnei Israel. So therefore, when you see at Har Sinai, in these parashiyot, in Kitisa, Mishpatim, whatever is said here in Sefer Shemot, that's all that was said, general things. And then if you find something else that's said in Bimidbar Devarim, that it means it's a detail that was not said at Har Sinai, but rather only revealed later on. And that's why it's not a doubling. because it only says it once. For that reason, if you see something repeated in the earlier book and a later book, it's actually not a repetition, right? It's there to add more details that were never said before. Rabbi Akiva, however, says no. All the generalities and details of every single one of the 613 mitzvot were all given to Moshe at Har Sinai. Moshe maybe didn't repeat all of them to Bnei Israel, so that's we don't hear about them, but Moshe got them all. And then they were repeated again in Ol Moed throughout the 40 years, and they were repeated again at Adavot Ma'av. You want to repeat them, he wanted to clarify them for Bnei Israel. But in fact, they were all given there, and therefore everything was known at Har Sinai. All right, we're not going to get into all of the implications of this machloket, except for how it applies here. If you think that the olah, now we're going for according to the Bishmael, the olah that was done in before Matan, actually easier to see before Matan Torah, not even there, but at Har Sinai was a olah tamid. Hold on, they didn't yet know the laws about hefshet and nituach, about the skinning and cutting. Before you bring the korban tamid, you have to skin it, cut it a certain way, and only then do it. All those laws are only said later in Sefer Vayikra, so they weren't yet known at the time of Matan Torah. If they weren't known, they couldn't have done them. If they didn't do those laws, is it possible that they did a korban tamid without doing that essential avodah? It's an essential avodah. They couldn't have done it. So since they didn't know the law, that's a proof that they did not do korban tamid. And therefore, according to Bishmael, they did not do korban tamid. That would have to be a olot reiah in that pasuk. Okay, we're actually going to reverse this in a few minutes, but right now, that's the Bishmael. Rabbi Eliezer de Tanya, how do we know that he agrees with Bet Shammai? Says olot tamid hasuya b'Har Sinai. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ma'aseha ne'emru b'Sinai, hi atzma lo kareba. In the manuscripts, every time it says his name, it's always Rabbi Eliezer. So I'm following the manuscripts, and he says it's what the instructions of how to do it were mentioned at Har Sinai, but the Korban Tamid was not started at Har Sinai just yet. That's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. And so he says pretty explicitly that no, Korban Tamid was not done at Har Sinai, even though it says Ha'asuya Har Sinai. It doesn't mean literally Ha'asuya. It means that they were told that eventually they're going to have to start doing it once they have an Ohel Moed set up, and then they'll do it after that. Rabbi Akiva Omer Kareba v'shuv lo paska. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenos. He says yes, it was offered. Korban Tamid was offered right away, and it never stopped, not one day since then. Ela ma ani makem hazevachim u'mincha higashtem li b'midbar arbim shana bet Yisrael. According to Rabbi Akiva, if in fact they did Korban Tamid from the time of Matan Torah all the way through the desert, every single day, never missed a day, well then, how do you explain the pasuk in Amos? Amos says, I don't want your korbanot, stop bringing them to me. Did you bring me korbanot during the 40 years of the desert? It's a rhetorical question. The answer is no, you didn't bring them to me. So you see that's not essential to me. I don't really want them. That's not essential to the Berit. Okay, this is one of the many pisukim in the Nevi'im that say Hashem does not need sacrifices, and that's not the main thing. And all these pisukim are very troubling for the rabbis and the commentators because they, even though the Nevi'im they can't say strongly enough, I don't want the korbanot, but nevertheless, we see the korbanot are so important in the Torah and later on. So what does this mean? So now we're going to have to, Rabbi Akiva is going to have to explain it, because if you take it literally that they did not bring korban tamid in the 40 years, Rabbi Akiva says they did bring it every day. So we do have to reconcile it, and here's the reconciliation: Shibto shel Levi shelo avdu avodah zara hen hikribu ota. Only the tribe of Levi, they did not do avodah zara. They were not part of the golden calf. And so they brought the Korban Tamid. In other words, usually Korban Tamid was taken from Machasita Shekel. Everybody contributes to it. But once they did the golden calf, so all those who were involved in that sin were basically like excommunicated and said, I don't want your sacrifices. And they could not, would not contribute to the Korban Tamid, except for the tribe of Levi. They did not take part in Egel HaZahav, they did not do Avodah Zarah, and therefore they were able and willing to contribute to the Korban Tamid. And so when Amos said, did you all Bnei Israel, did you all bring Korban Tamid in the 40 years? The answer is no, because only Shevet Levi did. But Rabbi Akiva is also right, because in fact, Korban Tamid was brought by somebody all 40 years, just not by everybody. All right, and so now we saw that. Now we get to the other side, the three that agree with Bet Hillel. Bet Hillel hadamaran. Bet Hillel brought his proof already. Rabbi Akiva hanam hadamaran. Rabbi Akiva, we happened to bring it just now. We brought it because we were mentioning Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Akiva is mentioned in the same baraita. So we know his opinion already, that yes, Korban Tamid was brought at Har Sinai. And finally, Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, the Tanya, Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, Omer, Shalosh mitzvot nistavu Yisrael ba'alotam laregel, reiah, Hagigah, v'simcha. Bnei Israel are commanded 3 commandments when they come for the holiday. That is the olot reiah and the Shamai Hagigah and the Shamai simcha. And then he goes on and he says, Yesh bereiyah she'en bishtehen, yesh bechagigah she'en bishtehen, yesh besimcha she'en bishtehen. And this Braita, Rabbi Yosef HaGalili continues to teach that each one has something unique. There's something about reiah, Korban reiah, that's not true of the others. There's something about Korban Chagigah, not true of the other 2. And there's something special about simcha that's not true of the others. What are they? Yesh bereiyah she'en bishtehen, she'reiah ula kula lagavoa, ma she'en ken bishtehen. Korban olot reiah is an olot, it's all burnt, whereas the others are shelamim. That's true. Yesh b'chagigah ma she'en bishtehem, shechagigah yeshna lifnei hadibur, ma she'en bishtehem. Here's the key line. That's what brought this whole thing. That the Hagigah is special, and that the Hagigah was brought even before Matan Torah, whereas the other 2, Simcha and Olot Re'iyah, were not brought before Matan Torah. So there you go. Well, if they didn't bring that, or if that Olah was not Olot Re'iyah, then what did they bring when it says Vayalu Olot? Must be Korban Tamid. Okay, that's his proof. Yesh b'simcha mashen b'shtehen, mashen simcha noheget b'nashim u'b'nashim, mashen ken b'shtehen. And there's also something special regarding the simcha, because the korban, the shalmei simcha, applies to men and women, not so with the other 2 that are only applied to men. And so this actually goes back to the beginning of the daf today, that women are also obligated to be happy on the holiday. And how do you be happy? Well, you have to be, you come and you make a nice meal and you bring meat and you make a barbecue and you invite everybody and eat together. And so women are obligated in Shalmei Simcha. All right, now we saw the 3 on each side. We're going to now actually exclude Rabbi Ishmael. We put him in, but you know what? He doesn't belong. Rabbi Ishmael, how come you assume that Rabbi Ishmael is like Bet Shamai? You know, for the later Scott, they don't want to be like Bet Shamai, so we're trying to save him. Well, we were under the assumption that Isa kadatech olah shikribu Yisrael b'midbar olat tamid havai mikamidi demikara la b'hefshet v'nituach b'sof b'hefshet v'nituach. Well, our line of reasoning went that there can't be anything if you think that they brought a olah. That the olah that they brought is olat tamid. Can it be that at first they did a olat tamid without skinning and cutting up the animal properly, and they didn't have the laws yet? They didn't know the laws because they weren't given at Har Sinai. They were only given later. And so it's impossible they did Korban Tamid without all the procedures, and therefore that's what we assumed before. Rabbi Ishmael must follow Bet Shammai that they didn't do Korban Tamid at all. Better say they didn't do it at all than to say that they did it incorrectly. But that's not true. This assumption is not true. But how to be Yosef HaGalili, we happen to mention him. Since we mentioned him. Here's another thing that he says. Tamad olah shekribi sabamidbar olat tamid havai mekarada behefshet v'nituach basof behefshet v'nituach. Yosef HaGalili, who was on the list of Bet Hillel, and he said that even though yes they brought an olat tamid, they didn't do the full system at that time. They did not do the skinning and the cutting, right? Because he would agree that they could bring Korban Tamid, not fully, because they didn't have Mishkan yet, so they didn't do the whole thing. And so he agrees with Bet Hillel. Well, once I know that, this undermines the reason why we put Rabbi Ishmael in that category. Now, how do we know Rabbi Yosegeli says that? The Tanya Rabbi Yosegeli omed. Olah shektu b'sabah midbar enatu nehefshet v'netuach. The vishen nehefshet v'netuach el moed moed ve'elach. Rabbi Yosegeli says the korban, the olah that they brought in the desert, they didn't do skinning because that's only required once you have a ohel moed. You need the whole structure of ohel moed so that you have a place that you do that and you skin it and all that. Whereas when you're just on the mountain using a temporary mizbeach, you don't have to do all the procedures. And so since that's true, Rabbi Ishmael could easily agree with this reasoning, and he may very well say that they brought, in fact, a korban olah. The olah that they brought was a korban tamid, and they didn't get all the laws, and they didn't know about skinning. But that's okay; you can bring olah without skinning back then. So therefore, semeh mikan Rabbi Ishmael. Let's erase Rabbi Ishmael and take him off the list of Bet Shamai, and we can put him on the list of Bet Hillel, and that way we saved Rabbi Ishmael. Okay, and lastly, ba'ed Rav Chisda haykera hechi ketiv vayishlachet na Rebbe Yisrael vayalu olot kevasim. The question is, where do you put the atnach in this pasuk when it says that the assistants of Bnei Israel vayalu olot? We put the atnach there. Vayalu olot, that's a separate thing, and it doesn't say what type of animal, but it could be any animal. Maybe they brought kevasim. See, this would be important because if it's a korban tamid has to be a keves. Has to be a lamb. So therefore, if you make that a separate clause, which it is here, atnach, vayalu olot, and those olot, in parentheses, were kevasim. And now, second half, shelamim ladonai parim. So the word parim at the end of the pasuk applies only to the shelamim. The shelamim were parim. Could we read it like that? Or the other way to read it is, it's all one long thing. They brought olot and shelamim, and all those olot and all the shelamim were all parim. If you think they're all parim, then you'd have to agree with Bet Shamai because there's no parim could be olot reiah. They cannot be a korban tamid. And that's the question. How do you read this pasuk? And we ask, what's the difference? It makes a difference in where we're going to put the ta'amim. Back in the times of the Talmud, they didn't have atnach, they didn't have our system, but they had oral tradition about how to read it and where to put the accent, where to put the punctuation. So according to the way we have it, olot is the middle, and that's a separate thing. Parim has to do with shelamim. If you would read it otherwise, then you'd have to take the atnach and move it forwards and put it maybe on the word shelamim, right? They brought olot and shelamim, and both of those were laHashem parim. And so it would make a difference in how we punctuate the pasuk, and that's one difference. Another difference would be, well, what kind of animal was it? If someone, even nowadays, say, I take upon myself a vow that I'm going to bring in olah, the same one that Bnei Israel did in the midbar over there at Har Sinai, then what would it be? My parim havu or kevasim havu? What would he have to bring? All right, a cow or a sheep? Teko. And we leave this question open-ended. You can read it both ways. Although, in order to agree with Bet Hillel, we would have to read it the way we do have it, with the atnach in the middle, vayalu olot, and those olot were one type, and then one type of animal, which could be kevasim, and the rest of the pasuk was the shelamim, and those shelamim were in fact parim. And so this is just absolutely fantastic daf where we learned that very important principle, the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael, about the repetitions of laws throughout the Torah, and also the way punctuation, just where you put an atnach, can make a huge difference in many aspects of halacha. And that's why we should make sure to learn the ta'amim first before we go and do anything else. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.